The blizzard hammering the glass walls of JFK Terminal 4 was not merely weather. It was an omen. Outside, the world was a chaotic swirl of gray and white, a violent erasure of the horizon. Inside the Delta Sky Club, the atmosphere was hermetically sealed, smelling of espresso, expensive perfume, and the faint metallic scent of high-stakes anxiety. Preston Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his reflection ghostly against the storm. At 48, Preston was a man constructed entirely of armor. His Navy suit was a custom Brioni, cut to hide the 5 pounds of stress weight he had gained in the last month. His watch was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a hunk of steel worth more than most people's college tuition. But beneath the luxury wool and Swiss mechanics, Preston was vibrating. He pressed his iPhone 15 Pro Max to his ear, his knuckles white. "I do not care about the audit, Marcus," Preston hissed, keeping his voice to a lethal whisper. "If the SEC sees the raw data from the Phase 3 trials before we secure the bridge loan, we are done. Not just the company. Me. Do you understand? I am talking about prison, Marcus. Federal prison." He listened to the stammering of his CFO on the other end, his jaw muscles twitching. "Fix the slide deck," Preston interrupted. "Bury the adverse reactions in the footnotes of the appendix. Make the font size 6 if you have to. Just get me that slide deck before I land in Chicago. I have to walk into Vance Capital looking like the second coming of biotech, not a desperate man begging for a lifeline." Preston ended the call and slammed the phone down onto the high-top marble table. The noise was louder than he intended. It echoed in the hushed lounge, causing a few heads to turn. He didn't care. Let them look. He was Preston Sterling, CEO of Sterling Biosolutions. He was a master of the universe, even if the universe was currently collapsing around his ears. He reached for his Montblanc pen to jot down a reminder on a napkin, but his shaking hand fumbled it. The heavy resin pen rolled off the table and clattered onto the carpeted floor, sliding under the adjacent armchair. "Damn it," Preston muttered. He looked around for a server, an attendant, anyone to fix this minor inconvenience. He certainly wasn't going to crawl on the floor in a $5,000 suit. Before he could snap his fingers, a hand reached down. It was a dark hand, the skin weathered, the knuckles slightly swollen with age. The hand retrieved the pen with a slow, deliberate grace and placed it gently on the edge of Preston's table. Preston looked down. Occupying the armchair next to him was a man he hadn't even noticed. The man was black, likely in his late 50s or early 60s. He was dressed in a way that Preston found offensive for a VIP lounge. A heather gray hooded sweatshirt that looked like it had been washed 100 times, loose-fitting denim jeans that had never seen a tailor, and a pair of nondescript, comfortable sneakers. He was reading a physical newspaper, the Financial Times, and sipping a glass of water. Preston exhaled, a sharp puff of air through his nose. He assumed instantly and without variable that the man was a driver, probably waiting for some rapper or athlete who was currently in the shower suite or getting a massage. "You can leave it," Preston said, dismissing the man without making eye contact. He grabbed a sanitizer wipe from his pocket and cleaned the pen where the man had touched it. The man didn't react to the insult. He simply turned the page of his newspaper, the rustle of the paper sounding incredibly loud in the silence between them. "I picked it up so you would not step on it," the man said. His voice stopped Preston's hand mid-wipe. It was a baritone rumble, deep and polished, with the kind of precise enunciation one expects from a Shakespearean actor or a tenured professor. It did not match the hoodie. It did not match the sneakers. Preston paused, looking at the man properly for the first time. The man wore reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He was looking at the stock market tables. Preston forced a tight, condescending smile. "Well, thank you. You know, if you are waiting for your client, the flight to Atlanta is boarding at gate B32. Most of the entertainers are heading there for the awards show." The man finally looked up over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were dark, calm, and unsettlingly intelligent. "I am not going to Atlanta," the man said softly, "and I do not have a client." Preston laughed, a short barking sound. "Oh, my apologies. Lottery winner? Or perhaps a settlement check?" It was a cruel jab, a microaggression sharpened to a fine point. Preston wanted to put this man in his place. He needed to feel superior to someone, anyone, to offset the crushing inferiority He felt facing the bankruptcy of his company. The man slowly removed his glasses. He folded them and placed them on the table. He looked at Preston not with anger, but with a clinical curiosity, as if Preston were a bacteria culture in a petri dish. I am traveling to Chicago, the man said, to visit a grave. It is the anniversary of my wife's passing. Preston felt a flicker of discomfort, but he squashed it. He didn't have the emotional bandwidth for empathy today. Chicago. Flight 292. That is my flight. Then we are neighbors for the next 2 hours, the man said, returning to his paper. Preston scoffed. Unlikely. I am in first class. Seat 1B. The man didn't respond. He just kept reading. Preston checked his Rolex. It was time. He grabbed his Tumi briefcase and his garment bag, brushed imaginary dust off his lapel, and marched toward the exit without a backward glance. He needed a drink. A double. Maybe two. Elena stood at the boarding door of Flight 292, forcing a smile that made her cheeks ache. She had been flying for Delta for 15 years, and she could read the mood of a flight before the door even closed. Today, with the blizzard delaying everything and the holiday rush beginning, the mood was toxic. She watched the passengers stream down the jet bridge. It was the usual mix. Exhausted parents, anxious students, and the business elite who treated the aircraft like their personal living room. Then she saw him. The man from the manifest. Seat 1B. Preston Sterling. He walked with the aggressive stride of a man who owns the sidewalk. He was on his phone again, barking about equity splits and hostile takeovers. He didn't look at Elena when he handed her his boarding pass. He just thrust it at her chest. Welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling, Elena said, scanning the code. Preston ignored her. He turned left into the first-class cabin and stopped dead. Elena watched from the galley. She saw Preston's shoulders stiffen. She saw him look at his ticket, then at the seat, then back at the aisle. Excuse me. Preston snapped, waving his hand at her. Elena took a deep breath. Here we go, she thought. Yes, Mr. Sterling? How can I help you? There is a mistake, Preston said, his voice loud enough to carry to the Economy Plus section. He pointed a manicured finger at the window seat, 1A. Elena looked. Sitting in 1A was an older black gentleman in a gray hoodie. He was already settled, looking out the window at the falling snow. He looked peaceful, almost statuesque. Elena checked her tablet. That is Mr. Vance, she said. He is in seat 1A. Preston laughed, a sound devoid of humor. No, sweetheart. You are not listening. I think your computer system made a glitch. Look at him. Preston lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, leaning in close to Elena. He smelled of expensive cologne and stale coffee. He obviously got auto-upgraded from the back because of the overbooking, but I paid full fare. $5,000. I have sensitive work to do. I cannot sit next to someone who is going to be listening to rap music on speakerphone or asking me for money. You need to move him back to his group. Elena felt a cold knot in her stomach. It was the benevolent racism she hated the most, the kind that framed bigotry as a misunderstanding or a concern for comfort. Mr. Sterling, Elena said, her voice firming up. Mr. Vance purchased a first-class ticket. He is in his assigned seat. Preston rolled his eyes. He is probably a driver who used his boss's miles. Fine. If you won't do your job, I will handle it. Preston turned to the man in 1A. Excuse me, pal, Preston said, tapping the man on the shoulder. The man turned slowly. It was the same man from the lounge. Samuel Vance. Preston put on a fake oily smile. Hey there. Listen, I think the stewardess made a mix-up. This is the first-class cabin. The economy section is straight back, past the curtain. You will probably be more comfortable there. More legroom in the exit row, maybe? Samuel looked at Preston. He didn't blink. He didn't look confused. I'm quite comfortable here, thank you, Samuel said. Preston's smile faltered. Look, buddy. I have work to do. Serious work. I need the armrest. I need the space. If you move back, I will give you. Preston reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. Here. Buy yourself a couple of drinks in the back. The insult was so grotesque that Elena actually gasped. She stepped forward to intervene, but Samuel raised a hand gently to stop her. Samuel looked at the $20 bill, then up at Preston. You assume my comfort has a price, Samuel said. And you assume that price is $20. Preston shoved the money back in his pocket, his face turning red. Fine. Have it your way. But do not expect me to be polite when you invade my personal space. Preston slammed his bag into the overhead bin, purposefully knocking Samuel's duffel bag to the side. He sat down in 1B, taking up as much room as physically possible, spreading his legs and claiming the shared armrest with his elbow. Elena walked back to the galley, shaking her head. She pulled out the passenger manifest again. She looked at the name, Samuel L. Vance. Status, Diamond Medallion. Special notes, VIP. Do not disturb. She looked at Preston Sterling's profile. Status, Platinum. Notes, High Maintenance. She made a mental note to keep the liquor flowing for 1A, and to keep a very close eye on 1B. Samuel Vance stared out the window, watching the de-icing truck spray orange fluid over the wings of the Airbus. He felt the elbow of the man next to him digging into his ribs. He didn't push back. He had spent 30 years in corporate boardrooms, 20 years as a risk analyst, and 10 years building Vance Capital into a multi-billion-dollar quiet giant. He knew men like Preston Sterling. He knew the type intimately. They were men who built their identity on external validation. The suit, the watch, the seat number. Take those away and they were hollow. Samuel knew that Preston was terrified. He could smell the cortisol coming off the man. The way Preston checked his phone every 30 seconds. The way his leg bounced. The way he was rude to the flight attendant. These were not signs of power. They were symptoms of a man drowning. Samuel decided to engage. Not to fight but to analyze. You seem anxious, Mr. Sterling, Samuel said, keeping his eyes on the window. Preston jumped, startled that the hoodie knew his name. I am not anxious, Preston snapped, opening his laptop. I am busy. And how do you know my name? You announced it to the gate agent. And the flight attendant. And the lounge staff, Samuel said. You seem very intent on making sure everyone knows who you are. Preston typed furiously, slamming the keys. In my line of work, reputation is everything. I run a biotech firm. We are curing cancer while you are. What? Watching the snow? I am reading, Samuel said, lifting his newspaper. Preston glanced at the paper. The Financial Times. You know, Preston said, a sneer curling his lip. It is funny. You reading that paper. It looks like a prop. Like a kid wearing his dad's tie. Samuel turned the page calmly. Why is that? Because, Preston chuckled, looking around the cabin to see if anyone else was enjoying his wit. That is complex market analysis. Derivatives. Hedging strategies. It is not exactly the sports section. I am familiar with the concepts, Samuel said. Oh, I am sure you are, Preston said. I bet you are very street smart. You people always have a hustle. What is it? Crypto? NFTs? Some pyramid scheme? Samuel slowly lowered the paper. He turned to face Preston. The cabin was quiet now, waiting for takeoff. The woman in 2A, the older lady with the tweed jacket, was watching them through the gap in the seats. Preston leaned in. You are very articulate, by the way. You speak very well. Where did you learn that? Prison library? The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. Samuel took a breath. He adjusted his cuffs. I learned to speak, Samuel said, his voice low and devoid of anger, which made it all the more terrifying, at Harvard Law School. Class of 1985. And I learned to read financial markets when I worked as the lead underwriter for Lloyd's of London. Preston blinked. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the sneakers. His brain couldn't reconcile the data. Harvard, Preston scoffed. Affirmative action was wild in the 80s, huh? Must have been nice to take a spot from someone qualified just to fill a quota. Samuel smiled. It was a cold, wintry smile. I graduated summa cum laude, Mr. Sterling. I did not take a spot. I earned the podium. Preston laughed, shaking his head. Sure. Whatever you say, pal. Keep dreaming. Preston put on his noise-canceling headphones, effectively ending the conversation. He signaled to Elena for a gin and tonic. Samuel returned to his paper. But he wasn't reading anymore. He was calculating. He had seen the logo on Preston's laptop screen. Sterling Biosolutions. Samuel knew that company. His firm, Vance Capital, had been approached just yesterday by Sterling CFO for an emergency bridge loan of $50 million. The dossier was sitting on Samuel's encrypted iPad in his bag. He knew the company was in trouble. He knew the clinical trial data was ambiguous. And now, sitting next to the CEO, seeing the man's erratic behavior, the desperation, the cruelty, the ambiguity was resolving itself into clarity. This man was not just a bigot. He was a liability. Judge Martha Oblivious sat in seat 2A, directly behind Samuel. She was 65 years old, retired from the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. She had spent 40 years listening to liars, thieves, and murderers. She had a radar for guilt that was more accurate than a polygraph. She watched the back of Preston Sterling's head. She watched him gulp down his second gin and tonic before the plane even reached cruising altitude. She watched him snap his fingers at the flight attendant. And she watched the man in 1A, Samuel. She recognized the dignity in his posture. She recognized the restraint. It was the restraint of a man who knew that if he raised his voice, even a little, he would be labeled the aggressor. She had seen it in her courtroom 1,000 times. The black defendant having to be twice as calm to be considered half as credible. She leaned forward slightly. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell the loudmouth in 1B to shut up. But she knew that intervention could sometimes escalate things. So she waited. She watched. She became the witness. The plane shook violently as it punched through the storm front. The seatbelt sign dinged. Preston Sterling yelped. A small pathetic sound. He grabbed the armrest, Samuel's side of the armrest, and squeezed. Whoa! Preston shouted. Is this safe? This doesn't feel safe. Samuel didn't move his arm. He let Preston grip the leather, his own arm pinned underneath. It is just thermal layers, Mr. Sterling, Samuel said calmly. The air density is changing. The pilot knows what he is doing. Preston was sweating now. Beads of perspiration rolling down his temple. I need to use the restroom, Preston announced. He unbuckled his seatbelt. The light is on, sir, Samuel said. You cannot get up. I don't care. Preston shouted. I'm going to be sick. Preston scrambled up, stumbling over Samuel's legs. He didn't say excuse me. He stepped on Samuel's foot with his heavy loafer, grinding the heel in. Watch it. Preston yelled, blaming Samuel for his own clumsiness. He lurched toward the front lavatory and slammed the door. Samuel looked down at his sneaker. There was a dark scuff mark on the gray fabric. He brushed it off with his hand. Elena walked by, balancing a tray of water. She looked at Samuel with sympathetic eyes. I am so sorry, Mr. Vance, she whispered. Can I move you? I have an empty seat in row 4. Samuel shook his head. No, Elena. Thank you. But I will not be moved. I paid for this seat. I will stay in this seat. Elena nodded. I understand. If he does anything else. Anything at all. Let me know. He is afraid, Samuel said quietly. Fear makes people ugly. Elena walked away, leaving Samuel alone. On Preston's tray table, his iPad Pro sat open. He had forgotten to close it in his panic. The screen had dimmed but wasn't asleep. Samuel glanced at it. He didn't mean to pry, but the text was large. It was a PDF document titled, Confidential Phase 3 Data Adjustment Protocol. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Data adjustment. In the financial world, that was a polite euphemism for fraud. He saw a marginal note highlighted in red. If we exclude the cardiac events in the control group, p-value hits 0.04. Do it. Samuel looked away. He had seen enough. He closed his eyes. The toilet flushed with a roar. The door opened. Preston Sterling emerged. He had splashed water on his face, but he looked worse. His eyes were wild, bloodshot. He had clearly taken something in the bathroom, a pill perhaps? He stumbled back to his seat. He stopped when he saw Samuel. He looked at his tray table. He looked at his iPad. It looked different. Had he left it at that angle? Had he closed the cover? He couldn't remember. He looked at Samuel. Samuel was looking straight ahead, but there was a subtle shift in his energy, a sharpness. You, Preston said, his voice trembling. Samuel turned. Yes. You were looking at my screen, Preston accused. He sat down heavily. You were snooping. I was sitting, Samuel said. I saw you. Preston lied. His paranoia was connecting dots that didn't exist. You saw the file. What did you see? Who do you work for? Are you a reporter? A spy? I am a passenger, Mr. Sterling. Just like you. No, you are not like me, Preston spat. He leaned in, his breath smelling of gin and mints. You are nothing like me. I build things. You just take up space. Preston grabbed his iPad and clutched it to his chest. I know what you are doing, Preston hissed. You are trying to intimidate me. Sitting there with your silence in your hoodie. You think you can scare me? I haven't done anything, Samuel said. That's the problem. Preston shouted. Heads turned. Even the pilot might have heard it through the reinforced door. It's what you represent. You think you deserve to be here. In this cabin. Next to me. You don't. You are a diversity hire. A quota filler. And now you are a thief. Samuel stiffened. A thief? Preston looked around frantically. His Patek Philippe watch. He wasn't wearing it. He had taken it off in the bathroom to wash his hands. Or had he? He felt his wrist. It was bare. My watch, Preston gasped. He looked at the empty tray table. He looked at the floor. It was gone. He looked at Samuel. A dark, twisted smile formed on Preston's face. He had him now. He had a reason. Where is it? Preston demanded. Where is what? My watch. My Patek. It was on the table. You took it while I was in the bathroom. Samuel looked at the empty table. I did not see a watch. Liar. Preston screamed. He stood up, hitting the call button repeatedly. Elena. Security. The cabin erupted into murmurs. Judge Martha stood up in row 2. Elena came running from the galley. This man stole my $50,000 watch. Preston yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Samuel's face. Search him. Search him right now. Samuel Vance sat perfectly still. He placed his hands on his knees, palms open. He looked at Elena, then at Preston. He didn't panic. He didn't plead. He simply engaged the lock on his own emotions, entering the cold, hard mode of a man who knows the law better than his accuser knows his own name. Mr. Sterling, Samuel said, his voice cutting through the noise like a gavel. You have just made a formal accusation of felony theft. There is no turning back from this. I don't want to turn back. Preston screamed. I want my watch. And I want you off this plane. The war was no longer invisible. And Preston Sterling had just fired the first shot at a man who owned the ammunition factory. The accusation hung in the pressurized air of the cabin, heavier than the storm clouds outside. Search him. Preston Sterling had screamed, and the echo of that demand seemed to vibrate against the plastic walls of the Airbus. In seat 1B, Preston was standing, his chest heaving, his face a mask of sweaty, frantic entitlement. In seat 1A, Samuel Vance sat perfectly still, his hands resting openly on his knees, his posture relaxed but alert. It was the stillness of a predator waiting for the prey to make a fatal error, or perhaps the stillness of a mountain enduring a gale. Elena, the lead flight attendant, stood in the aisle, her hands raised in a placating gesture. She looked from Preston's wild, bloodshot eyes to Samuel's calm, impassive face. She could feel the eyes of the entire first-class cabin boring into her back. The wealthy couple in row 3 had lowered their magazines. The tech entrepreneur in 4A had taken out his phone and was discreetly recording. Mr. Sterling, Elena said, her voice tight with the strain of maintaining professional neutrality. Please lower your voice. You are disturbing the other passengers. He stole my watch. Preston shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Samuel. It is a Patek Philippe Nautilus. Rose gold. It is worth $80,000. It was right here on the tray table. I went to the bathroom, I came back and it is gone. He is the only one who could have reached it. Elena turned to Samuel. She didn't want to ask. She hated that she had to ask. But the accusation of grand larceny at 30,000 feet was not something she could ignore. Mr. Vance, Elena said softly, crouching down so she was at eye level with him, trying to de-escalate the power dynamic. I am so sorry to ask this, but did you see Mr. Sterling's watch? Samuel turned his head slowly. He removed his reading glasses and folded them, placing them into the pocket of his hoodie. His movements were deliberate, broadcasting to everyone watching that he had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. I did not see a watch, Samuel said. His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that carried effortlessly to the back of the cabin without him raising it a decibel. And I certainly did not take one. Preston scoffed, a wet, ugly sound. Of course he says that. What do you expect him to say? Yes, I stole it, here it is. He put it in his bag. Or his pocket. Search him. I want you to search his bag right now. Elena stood up. She took a deep breath. Mr. Sterling, I cannot search a passenger. That is not within my authority. Then get the pilot. Preston demanded. Get the air marshal. There has to be an air marshal on this flight. There is no air marshal on this flight, sir, Elena said. And the captain is flying the plane through a blizzard. I am the lead authority in this cabin. Then use your authority. Preston slammed his hand against the overhead bin. Do you know who I am? I am a Platinum Medallion member. I personally know your Vice President of Customer Experience. If you let this thief walk off this plane with my property, I will sue this airline into bankruptcy. I will have your job. Do you hear me? I will strip those wings right off your uniform. Elena flinched. It was a physical reaction to the violence in his tone. She looked at Samuel, her eyes pleading for a compromise. Mr. Vance, Elena whispered, leaning in close. Look, I know this is insulting. I know it is wrong. But if you could just empty your pockets, just to shut him up, please. For me, it was a seductive trap. The appeal to keep the peace. The request for the victim to swallow their dignity to make the aggressor comfortable. Samuel looked at Elena, and he saw the fear in her eyes. Fear for her job, fear of the conflict. He didn't blame her. Corporations trained employees to de-escalate, often at the expense of justice. But Samuel Vance had not survived the Jim Crow South, Harvard Law School in the 80s, and the cutthroat world of venture capital by capitulating to bullies. No, Samuel said. The word was soft, but it hit the cabin like a hammer. Elena blinked. I beg your pardon? I said no, Samuel repeated. I will not empty my pockets. I will not open my bag. I will not submit to a search. Preston let out a triumphant crow of laughter. See, he is refusing. That is admission of guilt. Guilty people hide things. Innocent people cooperate. Samuel turned his gaze to Preston. It was a cold, dissecting look. Innocent people, Mr. Sterling, maintain their rights, Samuel said. If I empty my pockets now, I validate your delusion that you have the right to suspect me based solely on my proximity and my appearance. I establish a precedent that a black man in a hoodie must prove his innocence to a white man in a suit simply because the latter demands it. I will not do that. Not for you. Not for $80,000. Not for $8 million. Preston's face turned a mottled purple. This isn't about race. You play the race card because you got caught. This is about theft. It is about power, Samuel corrected him. And you are finding that you have less of it than you thought. Preston lunged. It wasn't a punch but a grab. He reached for the duffel bag tucked under the seat in front of Samuel. Samuel didn't strike back. He simply placed his foot firmly on the bag and grabbed Preston's wrist. His grip was iron. Samuel didn't squeeze, he just held it. Immobilized it. Don't, Samuel warned. Get your hands off me. Preston shrieked. Assault. He is assaulting me. That was the breaking point. From seat 2A, the sound of a seatbelt buckle clicking open echoed through the quiet terror of the cabin. Judge Martha stood up. She was 5'4", wearing a tweed blazer and orthotic shoes, but she rose with the gravitas of a giant. She stepped into the aisle, blocking Preston's path. Sit down, young man, Martha said. Preston whipped his head around, startled by the intrusion. Who asked you? Mind your own business, Grandma. I am making it my business, Martha said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had the specific razor-sharp cadence of a woman used to commanding a federal courtroom. I am a retired judge of the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, and I am formally notifying you that you are currently committing 3 separate felonies. Preston froze. The word judge penetrated his gin-soaked fog. Martha ticked them off on her fingers, her eyes never leaving Preston's face. 1. Interference with a flight crew member. 2. Attempted simple assault. 3. Disorderly conduct in a sterile area. She took a step forward, forcing Preston to take a step back. And as for your theft accusation, Martha continued, her voice dripping with disdain, I have been watching you since takeoff. You are erratic. You are intoxicated. And you are a liar. I watched Mr. Vance while you were in the lavatory. He did not move. He did not touch your tray. He cleaned his glasses and turned a page of his newspaper. If this goes to trial, Mr. Sterling, I will be the first witness for the defense, and I will crucify you on the stand. Preston looked around the cabin. He saw the phones recording him. He saw the disgust on the faces of the other passengers. He saw the sheer, unmovable wall that was Samuel Vance. He felt the walls closing in. The debt. The fraud. The missing watch. That's it. And now a federal judge. He needed an exit. He needed to change the narrative. He couldn't be the villain. He had to be the victim. Preston slumped back into his seat, feigning a sudden wave of dizziness. He put his hand to his chest. I don't feel well, Preston stammered. I have a condition. This man. He threatened me. Martha raised an eyebrow. He did no such thing. He whispered it. Preston lied, his voice pitching up into a whine. When you weren't listening. He told me he had a weapon in his bag. He said he was going to hurt me if I didn't shut up. That is why he won't open the bag. He has a gun. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. The accusation of theft was one thing. The mention of a weapon at 30,000 feet was a nuclear option. Passengers gasped. The man in 4A stopped recording and looked terrified. Elena's face went white. Mr. Sterling, Elena said, her voice trembling. Are you reporting a threat to the safety of this aircraft? Yes. Preston shouted, seizing the new momentum. He has a gun. I know he does. We need to land. You need to divert the plane. Get this maniac off. Samuel closed his eyes for a brief second, exhaling a long, slow breath. It was the sigh of a man watching a child throw a tantrum that destroys the living room. Elena backed away toward the cockpit. I have to call the captain. She grabbed the interphone handset. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it once before catching it. She punched in the code for the flight deck. Preston smirked at Samuel. It was a small, vile victory. He knew it was a lie. Samuel knew it was a lie. But protocol didn't care about truth. Protocol cared about risk. Samuel looked at Preston. You have just escalated a dispute into a federal incident, Samuel said quietly. You are drowning, Preston. And you are trying to pull the whole plane down with you. Shut up, Preston hissed. You are done. We are going to divert. The FBI will be waiting. They will tear that bag apart. And while they are doing that, I will be in a car to my meeting. Preston believed it. He truly believed he could manipulate the system because the system had always worked for him. He was a rich white man in a suit. The system was built to believe him. Elena hung up the phone. She turned to the cabin. Her face was pale but set in stone. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice amplifying over the PA system. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We are initiating a lockdown of the flight deck. She walked up to row 1. She didn't look at Samuel. She looked straight at Preston. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bright red card. It was laminated and scuffed at the edges. Mr. Sterling, Elena said. This is a Section 504 notice of violation. She handed it to him. Preston swatted it away. It fluttered to the floor. I don't want your piece of paper. I want a diversion. Elena continued, reciting the script she had memorized in training but hoped never to use. You have been identified as a Level 2 security threat. You have communicated a threat regarding a weapon which has been deemed non-credible by witness testimony, but your behavior is endangering the flight. Who said it's non-credible? Preston screamed. The captain, Elena said. Judge Martha's testimony was relayed to the cockpit. The captain has declined to divert. We are continuing to Chicago. Preston's jaw dropped. The captain refused? However, Elena continued, her voice gaining strength. Law enforcement has been contacted. Port Authority police will meet this aircraft at the gate. You are to remain in your seat. You are cut off from alcohol service. If you stand up again, you will be restrained. She turned to Samuel. Her eyes were wet. I am sorry, Mr. Vance. We have to follow protocol. Police will board the aircraft first. Samuel nodded. Do your duty, Elena. I am not afraid of the police. Preston sat back stunned. The plan had backfired. The system had glitched. But then a dark thought comforted him. The police were coming. Good. Let them come. They would see a CEO and a man in a hoodie. They would check the bag. They would find the gun. Wait, there was no gun. But they would find something. Maybe he could plant something? No, too risky. But they would hassle Samuel. They would detain him. That was enough. As long as Samuel was detained, Preston could escape the cabin, get to his meeting, and secure the funding. He just needed to survive the next 40 minutes. The plane began its descent. The engines whined down, the pitch of the wind changing. Turbulence hit again. A sudden violent drop that made stomachs lurch. The fastened seatbelt sign dinged aggressively. Preston gripped the armrest, his knuckles white. He hated turbulence. It reminded him he wasn't in control. Something slid across the floor. It was a metallic sound. SKRT clink. It came from under Preston's own seat. Samuel heard it. He looked down. Sliding out from beneath the messy pile of Preston's discarded blanket and laptop bag was a watch. The Patek Philippe Nautilus. Rose gold. It hadn't been stolen. It had slipped off Preston's wrist, likely due to sweat and a loose clasp, and fallen between the seat cushions, only to be dislodged by the sudden drop in altitude. It slid across the carpet and came to a rest right next to Samuel's sneaker. Preston saw it. His eyes went wide. The object of his entire crusade, the justification for his rage, lay there accusing him. He looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at the watch. Then he looked at Preston. The silence that stretched between them was louder than the jet engines. Preston lunged for it. He wanted to grab it, hide it, pretend it never happened. But he was buckled in. He couldn't reach it without unbuckling. Don't, Samuel said. Preston froze. If you unbuckle now, Elena will have to restrain you, Samuel said. And if you pick it up, everyone will see. Preston stared at the watch. It was taunting him. Samuel leaned in. He didn't pick up the watch. He left it there on the floor, a gleaming piece of evidence. It was never about the watch, was it, Preston? Samuel asked softly. Preston swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. You thought what? Samuel asked. That because I am black I must be a thief? That because you are afraid of losing your company, you needed someone to punish? Preston's head snapped up. How do you know about my company? Samuel tapped the side of his own head. I pay attention. You were screaming into your phone in the lounge. Bridge financing. SEC inquiry. Hide the data. Preston's blood ran cold. The alcohol buzz evaporated, leaving only a stark, freezing terror. You heard that? Everyone heard that, Samuel said. But only I understood what it meant. You are committing fraud, Preston. And you are trying to use Vance Capital to cover it up. Preston felt like he was falling. The plane was stable, but his world was plummeting. Who are you? Preston whispered. Samuel didn't answer. He just pointed to the watch on the floor. You have a choice, Preston. You can pick up that watch, apologize to me, apologize to Elena, and admit you were wrong. Or you can leave it there. Preston looked at the watch. If he picked it up, he admitted he was a liar. He admitted he was incompetent. His ego, fragile and inflated, couldn't handle the humiliation. He couldn't say I was wrong to a man in a hoodie. I didn't see it, Preston muttered, turning his head away. It's not mine. Samuel watched him. A look of profound pity crossed his face. You would rather lose $80,000 than your pride, Samuel said. That is why your company is failing. You cannot face reality. The plane banked sharply. The Chicago skyline appeared in the distance, gray and foreboding. Elena's voice came over the intercom. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. The cabin was silent. Judge Martha was writing furiously in a small notebook. The passengers were tense, waiting for the drama to conclude. Preston sat staring out the window, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had doubled down. He had committed to the lie. Now he had to see it through. When the police came, he would tell them Samuel planted the watch there. Yes, that was it. Samuel stole it, got scared when the judge spoke up and tried to ditch the evidence. That was a plausible story. He could sell that. He was a salesman after all. He convinced himself of this new truth. By the time the wheels touched the tarmac with a screech of burning rubber, Preston Sterling had successfully rewritten history in his own mind. He was the victim. Samuel was the villain. And he was going to win. The plane taxied to the gate. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Usually this was the moment of chaos, people standing up, grabbing bags, pushing forward. But today nobody moved. Elena stood at the front of the cabin, blocking the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," she said. "We have authorities boarding the aircraft." The heavy door of the Airbus groaned open. Cold Chicago air rushed in. 2 police officers from the Chicago O'Hare Police Department stepped onto the plane. They were big men wearing tactical vests. Preston smiled. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. "Over here, officers," Preston called out, pointing at Samuel. "That's him. He has a weapon. He stole my watch and tried to plant it on the floor." The officers looked at Preston. Then they looked at Samuel. Samuel remained seated. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't look afraid. He looked at the officers with a calm recognition. One of the officers, a sergeant with a thick mustache, stepped past Preston. He didn't even look at the CEO. He walked straight to row 1A. Preston watched, confused. Why weren't they grabbing him? Why weren't they yelling? The sergeant stopped in front of Samuel. He looked down at the man in the hoodie. Preston smirked. "Here it comes. The handcuffs. The walk of shame." But the sergeant didn't reach for his cuffs. He reached up and touched the brim of his cap. "Mr. Vance," the sergeant said. His tone was respectful, deferential even. Samuel nodded. "Sergeant, I trust the tarmac transfer is arranged?" "Yes, sir," the sergeant said. "We have the car waiting stairs side. The chief sent us to make sure you were extracted without media interference." Preston's brain short-circuited. Extracted? Car waiting. "Wait a minute," Preston shouted. He stepped into the aisle, blocking the sergeant. "What are you doing? This man is a criminal. He threatened this plane. I am the victim. I am Preston Sterling." The sergeant finally looked at Preston. The look was one of mild annoyance, like one looks at a yapping dog. "Sir, step aside," the sergeant said. "You are ignoring my report," Preston yelled. He pointed at the watch on the floor. "Look, there is the evidence." The sergeant looked at the watch on the floor. Then he looked at Preston. "Looks like you dropped your watch, pal," the sergeant said dryly. "Pick it up and get off the plane before I arrest you for filing a false police report. We have the statements from the crew and the witnesses. We know exactly what happened here." Preston reeled back as if slapped. "Witnesses?" Judge Martha stood up. She handed a folded piece of paper to the sergeant. "Here is my statement, Sergeant, including the part where Mr. Sterling assaulted the gentleman and fabricated the bomb threat. My contact card is attached." Preston looked at Martha, then at Elena, who refused to meet his eyes. The sergeant turned back to Samuel. "Ready to go, sir?" Samuel stood up. He grabbed his duffel bag. He picked up the Patek Philippe watch from the floor. He held it out to Preston. Preston stared at it. "Take it," Samuel said. "You are going to need to sell it for bail money." Samuel dropped the watch into Preston's limp hand. Then, Samuel turned to the sergeant. "Actually, Sergeant, before we go, do you mind if I make one phone call? It is regarding the business meeting I came here for." "Go ahead, Mr. Vance." Samuel pulled out his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call a driver. He dialed a number on speakerphone. The cabin was silent. Preston stood frozen, clutching his watch. The phone rang twice. A voice answered. A familiar voice. It was Marcus Preston, CFO. "Hello?" Marcus sounded panicked. "Mr. Vance? Is that you? We have been waiting for your call. Is the meeting still on?" Samuel held the phone up, looking directly at Preston. "Hello, Marcus," Samuel said. "I am currently on the tarmac at O'Hare. I am standing next to your CEO, Mr. Sterling." Preston's eyes went wide. No. Marcus," Samuel continued, his voice calm and lethal. "Cancel the slide deck presentation. And tell the board of directors to convene in the main conference room in 1 hour. Why? Marcus asked. Is Preston with you? Samuel looked at Preston. The CEO was trembling, a tear leaking out of his eye. Mr. Sterling will be joining us, Samuel said. But he won't be leading the meeting. I am invoking the distress clause in our preliminary term sheet. And Marcus? Yes, Mr. Vance? Bring the raw data from the Phase 3 trials. The real data. Not the version Preston told you to edit. Samuel hung up the phone. The silence in the cabin was total. Preston Sterling fell back into his seat, his legs giving way. He looked at the man in the hoodie, the man he had tried to crush, the man he had called a thief. Preston whispered, "You are Vance?" Samuel adjusted his hoodie. "I am," Samuel said. "And you, Mr. Sterling, are sitting in my seat." Samuel turned and walked off the plane, flanked by the police, leaving Preston Sterling alone in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The revelation had arrived, and it hit harder than any turbulence. The silence that Samuel Vance left behind in the first-class cabin was not empty. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with the unspoken judgment of 12 witnesses. Preston Sterling stood in the aisle, clutching his rose gold Patek Philippe watch. The metal felt cold and greasy in his sweating palm. He looked at the empty seat 1A, then at the open door where Samuel had exited like a head of state. Preston turned to face the cabin. He needed to salvage this. He needed to spin the narrative before these people got to their phones, before they tweeted, before the story leaked. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie which felt like a noose. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston said, his voice cracking slightly before finding a fake, corporate baritone. "I apologize for the disturbance. That man. He was a known corporate agitator. A stalker. I was protecting the integrity of my company. I am sure you understand." Nobody spoke. The tech entrepreneur in 4A held up his phone. "I got it all on video, buddy, including the part where you tried to steal his bag." Judge Martha stood up in row 2. She gathered her purse with deliberate, calm movements. She stopped in front of Preston. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked at him with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. "Mr. Sterling," Martha said, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have sent men to prison for racketeering, murder, and fraud. But I have rarely met a man so desperate to destroy himself that he does the prosecutor's job for him." "You don't understand," Preston started. "Save it for the deposition," Martha cut him off. She turned to Elena. "Lead flight attendant, please provide me with the case number for the incident report. I will be filing my affidavit within the hour." Elena nodded, her face stony. "Of course, Your Honor." Preston realized then that he had no allies. The cabin was a jury, and they had already returned a verdict. He turned and fled. He ran up the jet bridge, stumbling once, his expensive Italian loafers skidding on the industrial carpet. He needed to get to the office. He needed to get ahead of Samuel Vance. Samuel Vance sat in the back of the black Porsche Panamera, as it wove through the restricted service roads of O'Hare Airport. The heated leather seats were comfortable, a stark contrast to the tension of the last 2 hours. He pulled his phone from his hoodie pocket. He had 3 missed calls from his vice president of acquisitions. He dialed Sarah, his chief legal officer. "Samuel." Sarah's voice was crisp. "We were worried. The flight showed delayed. Are you en route to the Sterling headquarters?" "I am," Samuel said. He looked out the window at the gray Chicago skyline. "Sarah, change the agenda for the meeting." "Change it?" "We are set to discuss the bridge loan terms. The $40 million infusion." "Scrap the loan," Samuel said. His voice was flat, carrying no emotion. "Prepare the paperwork for a Section 13D hostile takeover. Trigger the for-cause termination clause in the CEO's contract, based on the morals and reputational damage provision." There was a pause on the line. Sarah was used to Samuel's decisive nature, but this was aggressive even for him. "Samuel," Sarah warned, "to terminate for cause and strip his unvested equity, we need concrete proof of gross misconduct. Mere financial mismanagement isn't enough. We need a smoking gun." Samuel watched the airport terminal fade into the distance. "I have the gun, Sarah. I have 12 witnesses, a federal judge, and a police report regarding an assault and a false bomb threat. made by the CEO against a potential investor. He did what? Sarah gasped. Also, Samuel added, bring the forensic accounting team. He left his iPad open on the plane. He has manipulated the Phase 3 trial data. He adjusted the cardiac event exclusion criteria to inflate the efficacy rate. That is securities fraud, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. That is 5 to 10 years in federal prison. I know, Samuel said. Draft the motion. Meet me in the boardroom. And Sarah? Ensure building security is on standby. He hung up. He didn't feel happy. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt a deep, weary sadness. He had started Vance Capital to build things to empower innovators to create value. But so often his job wasn't planting seeds, it was pulling weeds. And Preston Sterling was a weed that had choked everything around him. Preston Sterling stood at the curbside of Terminal 3, frantically tapping his Uber app. There were no black cars available. No SUVs. The only ride available was a UberX. A Honda Civic located 6 minutes away. Damn it. Preston kicked a concrete bollard. He tried to call Marcus, his CFO, again. Straight to voicemail. He called his VP of Communications. Voicemail. He called his executive assistant. Mr. Sterling? Her voice sounded shaky. Jessica. Finally. Preston screamed into the phone. Where is my car? Why wasn't the driver at the gate? Sir. Security sent the driver away, Jessica whispered. They said your clearance has been suspended pending the board meeting. Preston froze. What are you talking about? I am the CEO. I am the clearance. Who authorized that? Mr. Vance's team is here, sir. They are in the conference room. They have the server logs. They are talking to Marcus. Preston felt the blood drain from his extremities. The server logs. The raw data. Listen to me, Jessica, Preston said, his voice trembling. Go to my office. Right now. Take the shredder bin. I can't, sir, Jessica said, and he could hear her crying. There are lawyers everywhere. They put yellow tape on your door. I have to go. The line went dead. Preston stared at the phone. His Uber arrived. A dented gray Honda with a baby on board sticker. The driver rolled down the window. Preston, the driver asked, chewing gum. Preston looked at the car. It was a humiliating chariot for a king, but it was his only option. He threw his bag in the back and climbed in. Sterling Biosolutions. Downtown, Preston ordered. And drive fast. I'll give you $100 if you break the speed limit. The driver shrugged. Whatever you say, man. The boardroom of Sterling Biosolutions was a glass-walled aquarium of panic. The mahogany table, usually polished to a mirror shine, was covered in stacks of paper, laptops, and coffee cups. The board of directors sat along one side. There was Old Man Reynolds, the chairman, looking pale. There was Dr. Aris, the chief scientist, looking guilty. And there were the venture capital representatives looking furious. On the other side of the table sat Sarah and 3 other lawyers from Vance Capital. They sat like statues, silent and terrifying. The double doors burst open. Preston Sterling marched in. He was out of breath, his tie crooked, sweat staining the armpits of his expensive suit. He looked like a man who had run a marathon through a swamp. I'm here, Preston announced, trying to project confidence but failing miserably. Sorry for the delay. Terrible traffic. Flight issues. He walked to the head of the table, his usual seat. Sit down, Preston, Chairman Reynolds said. His voice was ice cold. I will sit when I'm ready, Jim, Preston snapped. He looked at Sarah. Who are these people? Where is Samuel Vance? I was told he was coming. I am here, a voice said from the corner. Preston spun around. Samuel Vance was standing by the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. He hadn't changed clothes. He was still wearing the gray hoodie, the jeans, the sneakers. In the sterile corporate environment of suits and ties, he looked alien, but he radiated more power than anyone in the room. He turned slowly to face Preston. Please, Samuel said, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the table, the seat usually reserved for junior associates. Take a seat, Mr. Sterling. Preston bristled. This is my company. That is my chair. It was your company, Samuel corrected him. As of 9 a.m. this morning, Vance Capital has purchased the outstanding debt from your creditors. We are now your senior secured lender, which means we own the furniture, the patents, and the chair you are standing next to. Preston looked at the board. You let him do this? We have a plan. The Phase 3 data is solid. Dr. Aris, the chief scientist, looked down at his hands. Preston. They have the iPad logs. The room went silent. Preston felt the trap snap shut. The iPad? That was stolen. He stole it. He pointed at Samuel. This is industrial espionage. You cannot use stolen evidence. Samuel walked forward. He placed a document on the table. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a police report. I didn't steal anything, Preston, Samuel said quietly. You showed it to me. You left it open on a tray table in a public commercial aircraft. That is not theft. That is a violation of your fiduciary duty of confidentiality. Samuel tapped the document. But that is not why we are firing you. Preston's head snapped up. You can't fire me. I have a poison pill clause. I have a golden parachute. If you terminate me, you owe me $20 million. Samuel smiled. It was the same sad, wintry smile from the plane. The golden parachute only applies to termination without cause, Samuel said. Sarah, please read the motion. Sarah stood up, adjusting her glasses. She picked up a legal brief. Motion to terminate CEO Preston Sterling for cause, under Article 4, Section C, gross moral turpitude and conduct detrimental to the reputation of the company. Preston laughed nervously. Moral turpitude? Because I had a drink on a plane? Good luck proving that in court. Sarah continued reading. Specification 1. Filing a false police report regarding a bomb threat. Specification 2. Simple assault of a passenger. Specification 3. Public intoxication. Specification 4. Sarah paused. She looked at Preston with genuine disgust. Attempted coercion of flight crew to violate federal civil rights laws. Preston slammed his hand on the table. This is hearsay. It's his word against mine. Samuel pressed a button on the conference phone. Judge Martha? Are you on the line? The voice of the judge filled the room, crisp and amplified. I am here, Mr. Vance. And I have sworn in the court reporter. Preston's legs gave out. He collapsed into the junior associate's chair. Preston Sterling, Judge Martha's voice boomed. I have submitted my affidavit to your board. I witnessed you assault Mr. Vance. I witnessed you lie to the police. And I witnessed you degrade your own dignity in a way that was frankly pathetic. Samuel looked at the board. I think we have heard enough. All in favor of the motion to terminate for cause, effectively immediately, with forfeiture of all unvested stock options. Every hand went up. Even Marcus, the CFO. Even Old Man Reynolds. Preston watched the hands rise like a firing squad. You can't do this, Preston whispered. I built this. You built a house of cards, Samuel said. And you tried to burn it down to save yourself. Samuel walked over to Preston. He placed a banker's box on the table. It was empty. Pack your personal effects, Preston. Security will escort you out. Preston looked at the box. Then he looked at Samuel. The anger was gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. He was ruined. No other company would hire him. The SEC investigation would likely lead to prison time. The civil suits would bankrupt him. Why? Preston asked, his voice shaking. Why didn't you just tell me who you were on the plane? If you had just told me, I would have treated you differently. The room went deadly silent. Samuel leaned in close, so only Preston could hear the full weight of his answer. That is exactly the point, Preston, Samuel said. You should not need a title to treat a human being with respect. You treated me like nothing because you thought I was nothing. That reveals more about your character than any background check ever could. Samuel straightened up. Get him out of my building. 2 security guards. Men Preston had walked past every day for 5 years without ever learning their names, stepped forward. They weren't rough, but they weren't gentle. They took Preston by the arms. Preston stood up. He grabbed the framed photo of himself on the cover of Forbes magazine from the wall. He put it in the box. It was the only thing he took. He was marched through the open plan office. 200 employees stopped working to watch. They didn't look sad. They looked relieved. They had lived under his tyranny of shouting and fear for too long. As Preston reached the glass doors of the lobby, he saw a young janitor mopping the floor. A Latino man in a blue uniform. Preston stopped. The guards urged him forward, but he resisted for a second. He looked at the janitor. He remembered how he had treated Samuel in the lounge, the dropped pen, the assumption of servitude. Preston opened his mouth. He wanted to say something cruel. He wanted to kick the bucket over. He wanted to hurt someone because he was hurting. But then he saw Samuel Vance standing on the mezzanine level above, looking down. Samuel wasn't gloating. He was just watching. Preston closed his mouth. He looked down at his feet. "Excuse me," Preston mumbled to the janitor. It was the first time in 10 years he had apologized to a staff member. He walked out the revolving doors into the bitter Chicago cold. It was snowing again. He didn't have a car waiting. He didn't have a corporate account. He stood on the curb, shivering in his suit, clutching a cardboard box containing a picture of a man who no longer existed. Back in the boardroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a cautious optimism. Samuel Vance sat at the head of the table. He took off his hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. He looked tired. "Marcus," Samuel said to the CFO. "Yes, Mr. Vance?" Marcus was sweating, waiting to be fired next. "We are going to self-report the data discrepancies to the FDA and the SEC," Samuel said. "We are going to pay the fines. We are going to restate our earnings." "Sir," Marcus stammered, "the stock will tank. We will lose 40% of our value overnight." "Let it tank," Samuel said firmly. "Then we will rebuild it. But this time we will build it on actual science, not on arrogance." He looked around the table at the terrified executives. "One more thing," Samuel said. "From now on, nobody flies first class on the company dime. Not the chairman. Not me. We fly economy. We sit with the people who buy our medicine. We remember who we serve." "Economy?" Dr. Aris asked, horrified. Samuel smiled. A genuine warm smile this time. "It is not so bad, doctor. You meet the most interesting people back there. And the view out the window? It is exactly the same." Samuel stood up and walked to the window. The snow was covering the city, burying the dirt, making everything clean again. He touched the glass, thinking of his wife. She would have liked how he handled this. She hated bullies. He took out his phone and texted Elena, the flight attendant. He had asked for her number from the police officer. "Message Elena, this is Samuel Vance. Thank you for your professionalism today. I have spoken to the CEO of your airline. He agrees that you deserve a commendation, not a reprimand. Keep your wings. You earned them." He put the phone away. The meeting resumed. The work began. The tyrant was gone. And in the silence of the boardroom, for the first time in years, the voice of reason was finally loud enough to be heard.